The termination of our time on earth is an absolute and irreversible event. The very thought of our own mortality is so unsettling that the majority of us subconsciously push it away. For others, the dread is not so much about the state of non-being itself, but rather the suffering that might precede it, or the grief that accompanies the loss of those we hold dear. Each of us navigates a singular path filled with distinct experiences, yet we are all bound by a single shared destiny: mortality. It is this universal certainty that ultimately connects every one of us. It is said that death grins at every person, and the only response available to us is to grin in return. One could argue that death is an unwelcome event primarily because it robs us of our existence. Assuming we define death as a final cessation with no subsequent conscious awareness, this inquiry holds relevance even for individuals who hold faith in an afterlife, for a person's perspective on living forever is inevitably shaped, at least partially, by their feelings about mortality. The undesirability of death, if it exists at all, must derive from its power to conclude all the positive aspects that life holds. According to this viewpoint, life's value persists despite the presence of hardship, and a longer life is therefore preferable. The qualities that render life meaningful encompass all the things we find fulfilling. Life's worth is not simply connected to organic existence. Almost anyone would concede that an instantaneous death and a sudden coma leading to death without recovery are essentially equivalent outcomes. Hence, we can assert that having more life is positive as long as one is conscious and capable of accumulating good experiences. If we are to view death as undesirable, it is on account of what is lost, life itself, rather than the condition of being deceased or non-existent. Death is perceived as negative due to the value of what it takes away. This, however, introduces a new question. What if our lives were to extend indefinitely? If we faced a virtually limitless stretch of days, would that not breed a pervasive sense of apathy? With all the time in the world at our disposal, the drive to accomplish significant goals would diminish, the motivation to make each day meaningful would wane, and consequently, we might find ourselves transformed into a collection of discontented individuals. It is quite possible that mortality is precisely what imbues life with its value. American philosopher Thomas Nagel points out two prevalent fallacies concerning the concept of death. The initial error lies in the disparity between how we view our non-existence after death versus before birth. None of us were present before we were born or conceived, yet very few consider this a misfortune. Why, then, should posthumous death be seen as a negative while prenatal non-existence is not? Some might contend that nobody feels troubled by reflecting on the eternity that came before their birth, and therefore fearing death must be illogical, as death is merely a mirror reflection of that preceding void. This line of reasoning, however, does not hold up. While it is factual that the period before a man's birth and the period after his death are both times of his non-existence, the time following his death is time that his death has taken from him. It represents a duration in which, had he not passed away, he would have continued to live. In contrast, his birth, at the moment it happens, does not deprive him of any life. The time before his birth is not a period during which his eventual arrival prevents him from living. For this reason, one's prenatal non-existence is not analogous to one's posthumous non-existence. The second fallacy relates to the source of our fear of death. It is frequently asserted that individuals who protest against death have fallen into the trap of attempting to envision what it is to be dead, which fosters the belief that death is an enigmatic and dreadful future condition. This is a logical impossibility, as there is nothing to visualize once a person's mental capacities have ceased to function. People who fear death in this manner confuse the state of being dead with a conscious state, because it is simple to picture oneself from an external perspective in that situation. But it is an experience one can never have. A challenge arises with respect to death in determining how the alleged misfortune can be assigned to a subject at all. There is uncertainty about who the subject is and when they are subjected to it. As Epicurus stated, death does not concern us because as long as we exist, death is not here. And when it does come, we no longer exist. As long as an individual is alive, they have not yet died, and once they have died, they are no longer. Thus, there appears to be no moment when death's misfortune can be attributed to its subject. Consequently, a more rational fear people possess is of the pain one might endure prior to death. Therefore, one should not fear death itself, but rather the potential manners of dying. Ernest Becker, the writer behind The Denial of Death, received a diagnosis of colon cancer and passed away 2 years later at the age of 49. For this literary achievement, he was honored with a posthumous Pulitzer Prize, which brought him broader acclaim. Becker posits that we are thrust into a terrifying world, and our fundamental drive is a biological imperative to manage our innate anxiety and deny the terror of death. He wrote, "This is the terror, to have emerged from nothing, to have a name, consciousness of self, deep inner feelings, an excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression, and with all this yet to die." The terror of mortality is so potent that we collectively scheme to keep it suppressed. Our first layer of protection from the agonizing realization of our own helplessness is what he calls the vital lie of character. Each child draws strength from adults and shapes a personality by assimilating the traits of a godlike figure. If I am like my omnipotent father, I will not perish. The child yearns for self-aggrandizement, or what Becker labels cosmic significance. This encapsulates humanity's tragic plight. He must desperately justify himself as an object of primary value in the universe. He must stand out, be a hero, make the biggest possible contribution to world life, show that he counts more than anything or anyone else. The challenge of heroics is the paramount issue of human existence. It is the fusion of organismic narcissism with the inherent need for self-worth that forges a being who must perceive himself as an object of supreme importance as a condition for his own life. We construct a character armor that provides a sense of security and allows us to act as if the world is a controllable place. The cost for this, however, is substantial. Life slips by while we take refuge inside the fortified bastion of our character. The irony of man's condition is that the deepest need is to be free from the anxiety of death and annihilation, but it is life itself which awakens it, and so we must shrink from being fully alive. Society offers a secondary defense against our inherent powerlessness by devising a hero system, which enables us to believe we can overcome death by taking part in something of enduring value. We attain a form of surrogate immortality by dedicating ourselves to founding a family, amassing a fortune, creating a work of art, and other such endeavors. Given that the principal objective of human life is to achieve heroism and transcend mortality, every culture is obliged to furnish its people with a complex symbolic framework that is implicitly religious. Our heroic endeavors become my deities against your deities, my immortality project against your immortality project. It is man's fundamental narcissism that enables soldiers to charge into direct gunfire during wars. Deep down, a person doesn't believe he will be the one to die, feeling only sympathy for the soldier beside him. Becker suggests that we should actively contemplate death. Nurturing an awareness of our own mortality results in disillusionment, the shedding of character armor, and a deliberate decision to persist in the face of terror. This is the path of the existential hero which sets him apart from the average individual. Rather than concealing himself within illusions, he acknowledges his own impotence and vulnerability. By living with a voluntary consciousness of death, the heroic person can either succumb to despair or take a leap of faith. Man cannot endure his own littleness unless he can translate it into meaningfulness on the largest possible level. Becker notes, however, that acknowledging the need for heroism is a difficult truth for anyone to face, and so we obscure our struggles by accumulating assets in a portfolio to privately affirm our sense of heroic value. To become aware of what one does to secure this feeling of heroism is the chief self-analytical task of life. The Stoics, in contrast, do not subscribe to the idea of the terror of death. They view it as a natural occurrence that should not be a source of fear. They engaged in the practice of memento mori, meditating on your mortality, as a reminder that we are all destined to die. Marcus Aurelius expressed it thus: "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly." Death empowers a person to live their life to the fullest. For it is not death that a man should dread, but rather the failure to ever truly begin living. To the Stoics, death is not a source of anxiety or paralysis. It is a component of the natural world. Epictetus wrote, "I have to die. If it is now, well then I die now. If later, then now I will take my lunch, since the hour for lunch has arrived, and dying I will tend to later." If each passing second is a step towards dying, it enables one to avoid taking anything in this life for granted and to engage with it completely, cognizant that life is fleeting. This also helps us to concentrate on what truly matters. Constantly run down the list of those who felt intense anger at something, the most famous, the most unfortunate, the most hated, the most whatever. And ask, where is all that now? Smoke, dust, legend, or not even a legend, and how trivial the things we want so passionately are. Nietzsche also welcomed and extolled death, discussing the concept of a free death. He asserted, "Many die too late, and some die too early." The doctrine still sounds strange. Die at the right time. To be sure, how could the person who never lives at the right time ever die at the right time? Would that he were never born? Thus, I advise the superfluous. Everyone regards dying as important, but death is not yet a festival. As of yet, people have not learned how to consecrate the most beautiful festivals. I show you the consummating death that becomes a goad and a promise to the living. The consummated one dies his death, victorious, surrounded by those who hope and promise. Thus one should learn to die, and there should be no festival where such a dying person does not swear oaths to the living. Nietzsche puts forth a vision of the ideal death, one that is chosen with autonomy and happens at the opportune moment. Death ought to be a culmination of life, elevated by a meaning and purpose that arise from the life that is concluding. He contrasts this with what he calls the preachers of death. There are preachers of death, and the earth is full of those to whom one must preach renunciation of life. There are those with consumption of the soul. Hardly are they born when they begin to die, and too long for doctrines of weariness and renunciation. They would like to be dead, and we should welcome their wish. Let us beware of waking the dead and disturbing these living coffins. They encounter a sick or a very old person or a corpse, and right away they say, life is refuted. Nietzsche dismisses the gloom that comes from encountering sickness, old age, or a corpse as a rejection of life. He demonstrates the ways in which living individuals can be functionally dead. There are modes of death beyond the physical cessation of life. These include the living dead, who evade the challenges of existence by escaping into their work and by renouncing life. Socrates, the progenitor of Western philosophy, might well be an individual who exemplified dying at the right time. At 70 years of age, he was condemned to die. The Oracle of Delphi, which summarized all human wisdom in the phrase "know thyself," had proclaimed that no man was wiser than Socrates. This prompted him to embark on his educational mission, characterized by his well-known irony, "I know that I know nothing." He gained a reputation as the gadfly of Athens, posing relentless questions to reveal the inconsistencies in people's thoughts and beliefs. It was an effort to employ critical examination to challenge established convictions and modes of thinking. This became known as the Socratic method. As detailed in Plato's Apology, Socrates was sentenced to death by consuming hemlock for the charges of impiety towards the Athenian gods and of corrupting the city's youth. During his trial, he delivered his famous declaration, "The unexamined life is not worth living." He was presented with the option of living in exile, which he rejected. He passed his final day in prison while his friends visited, offering him a chance to escape, which he also declined. His cryptic last words were, "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it." Socrates was expressing gratitude to the god Asclepius for curing him of the disease of life with the remedy of death. The rooster, whose crowing optimistically signals the arrival of a new day, was a symbol of rebirth and the afterlife for the ancient Greeks, and a customary offering to Asclepius, the god of healing. Socrates is merely giving thanks and alluding to an afterlife. He calls upon the one deity known to bring the dead back to life, who Socrates implies with his final utterance has already helped to heal both himself and his followers from the fever of mortal existence. He instructs his friends to strive for the purification of their souls, to serve their fellow men with compassion, and to devote their lives to the well-being of the community. Carl Jung held that a person must be as prepared to live as they are to die. He stated, "Death is psychologically as important as birth, and like it, is an integral part of life. As a doctor, I make every effort to strengthen the belief in immortality, especially with older patients when such questions come threateningly close. For, seen in correct psychological perspective, death is not an end, but a goal, and life's inclination towards death begins as soon as the meridian is passed." Jung's entire psychological framework is built upon the presence of psychic dichotomies within the human mind. He emphasized the importance of maintaining the tension between these opposites. Death is unavoidable, and to believe otherwise is to reside in a state of denial and to live in opposition to one's own instincts. Jung takes issue with modern culture for its lopsidedness concerning this pair of opposites, with its nearly exclusive emphasis on life and its denial of death. He advises us to get ready for the latter half of our lives. But how are we to confront death as we age? He wrote, "Death is an important interest, especially to an aging person. A categorical question is being put to him, and he is under an obligation to answer it. To this end, he ought to have a myth about death, for reason shows him nothing but the dark pit into which he is descending. Myth, however, can conjure up other images for him, helpful and enriching pictures of life in the land of the dead. If he believes in them, or greets them with some measure of credence, he is being just as right, or just as wrong, as someone who does not believe in them. But while the man who despairs marches toward nothingness, the one who has placed his faith in the archetype follows the tracks of life and lives right into his death. Both, to be sure, remain in uncertainty, but the one lives against his instincts, the other with them.